everyone. Thanks for coming and joining us for another meeting of the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. My name is Mike Kanakis.
And I'm Phil Bossman.
It is August 17th. Tonight we're going to be talking about error handling, and our guest speaker tonight also happens to be my co-lead, Phil Bossman. Hey Phil, how are you?
I'm doing well.
All right. And so Phil's going to be talking about the basics of error handling and throw and catch and all that great stuff. I just want to remind you, if this is your first time joining our group or watching us on YouTube, we have about 120 videos on our YouTube channel. Check us out, YouTube/RTPSUG. And if you subscribe and hit the bell, you'll get notified when we post new videos. We're posting a few videos every month, and we'd love for you to join us. If you'd like to join us in person, you can visit us on Meetup or at rtpsug.com. We meet on the first and third Wednesday of the month, and we'd love for you to come and join us for the live sessions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I don't have any slides because I'm not a PowerPoint guy. I'm a PowerShell guy. So want to go around. So this talk is basically a request from others in the community. We put out a poll. This is what people want to talk about. And people asked, hey, we could talk about error handling. And so then I kind of looked around and to see what other people are doing with error, not so much people in the community and not what they're doing with it, but how they understand it and how they're using it. And so I thought I'd, do a talk just on the core fundamentals of what it all is. This is not going to be like, hey, if you're having this problem, these are kind of the errors you can catch and stuff like that. But even that whole idea, what the heck's a catch? What is a throw? We use some of these terms. And so I'm going to just use my rough outline and we're going to jump back and forth. So we're going to talk, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through like terminology. We're going to go through that. Then we're going to talk about something called terminating error and a non-terminating error. And there is a thing, these are things, and it operates differently. So people said, oh, it threw an error, but then why did it do this and why did it do that? So we're going to kind of talk about some of that stuff. Okay. We're going to talk about how to handle some of those errors when you can catch them, when you can't. And then what happens if you do. Then we're going to talk about error action. You can inject your own errors and things into the scope. Something specific as far as catching certain types. We'll look at the exception record or the error record itself. Then we'll talk about the error variable, and then if we get all the way down to it, we'll do some try catch finally, and then maybe some trapping as well. So that's what we're going to get into, and then we're going to go from there. So terminology. So errors themselves. Errors is like this great, global thing that you understand. Hey, something didn't do what you wanted it to do. Well, is it an error? Well, maybe. But this is the kind of thing where you get like the red screen, the red text on the screen, right? And it is an object type that is an error. But that point is you shouldn't be afraid of it. Like one of our leaders here, or past leaders, Lars, he's like, oh, blood on the screen. Like, don't worry about it. Okay, errors are fine so long as you know how to manage them and work with them effectively, right? But an error isn't necessarily, because it's a terminating or non-terminating, it can generate an exception, or it can be something that's just something that gets put into an error log, the error variable we'll talk about later, and then it's just something to log. It's just logging events at that point. But don't necessarily, I kind of like take an abstraction as to an error. It's just some more information. It goes into a different place, and so we can catch our errors, we can do other things, and then let the flow go differently. Next thing, kind of the exceptions. An exception is literally that. Something didn't happen the way it should have happened. And so you need to kind of potentially pause and do something. You need to do something with it, or do nothing with it. Basically, it's something you need to deal with. One of the things that I wanted, not really in this, but the idea of scope. I know we're going to probably go a little bit deep, but it doesn't. I'm going to try and stay as high level as we possibly can. Is that when you're dealing with some errors and stuff like that, and you're trying to, hey, why is this happening here and why is this not happening? If you're dealing with functions and you're dealing with other code, you can, depending upon where you are in scope, this error occurred inside this file, inside this script, and that's why I see it out here. Or something down below, I don't see it. So there's global, local, and script. So you can keep errors, and errors can be caught, and let me just put it this way. Errors can be caught in scopes of what they are. So you can you can put code at the very top that says we'll catch anything, but if you don't catch it low enough, then you can do other things. So if you don't catch it now, it goes thrown up above, and then the above all the way out till you finally get to the actual PowerShell process itself, and then throws an error. And then eventually, it will dump out and give you, an exit code that is an error code. So it will go up that stack. And that's kind of where I'm getting to is its call stack. So the process, exe PowerShell itself, you call one script which has a function. Well, that function, anything here, if you don't catch it in the first function, it'll go up to the script. And if it doesn't catch there, it goes up that way. Same thing down here. So like this function goes up. And then the idea is that if you have an error here and your error detection is in this, is in file 1, nothing's going to get caught. And the same thing that issue there. And then where do the errors go? So kind of also high level talked about scoping and where things are. Well, now we can think, I use this term many times so far, is like catching, then throwing. Well, what is that? Is actually generating an exception, okay, on the fly. You can have commandlets and your functions themselves do other things to throw the exceptions, or you can actually just use this keyword basically called throw. And you just say, hey, throw this. And so you're expressly just saying, I don't know what this is. There's some other thing, just throw. I guarantee I want to throw an exception. And so that's one of the things you do from there. And then catch is kind of thing we saw before is where do those exceptions go, right? And so you need to create a block that is your catch and hold on to it and do some work with it, right? So that's what your catch is. So I know that's kind of like way all over the place, but it's this idea of use some fundamental referencing terminology so that we can then go down the world. Any questions? Everybody's good.
So you think it's worth asking, does anybody not understand that concept and needs a little bit more explanation? I know Phil's going to go into some of this, but if these terms are new to you and you don't even get the idea of throw and catch, please let us know. We can try to do a better job of explaining it. We'll get to it as we go, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I'm free to, I'm open to getting interrupted and asking questions from there. So please do that as well. So we're going to, typically we go with terminating errors and then people go to non-terminating errors, but I'm going to flip it on its turn. It's the non-terminating error. So this is that thing where you just see code code and errors in your code is in the console. I saw a bunch of errors. Like, okay, but your script still ran. Got all the way to the end. You still did a bunch of work, and things happened, right? So, hey, some example of some run. What happened? Did I do this right? I don't know. I see any text. See any text? I can see this one. Oh, there it goes. So, I thought I shouldn't have got a folder file list. I don't know. Well, we'll skip over that. So really, if we did this, basically, you're going to see a bunch of formatting, and this is just so that you understand what's happening at the point, right? I'm just throwing in a start, and this should be a get item. So actually, let's just jump out. Here's me doing other stuff. Yeah, throwing an error.
Would that be a non-terminating error?
Well, at this point, yes. Screen. All right, so this is what I expected. Hey, we're just saying, hey, we're starting the command, and then we got some output. Right, so we got some output, and then, hey, there's an end. So I got all the way to the end of that block of code, right? So that's just normal successful code where we are, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is do some work, and this folder doesn't exist. I fat fingered this, all right? And so it's going to throw an error. So I see the start. I'm going to throw an error. I get some other work, and I throw another error. Oh, there's something else in there, but I still got to the end. Okay, I got in my code in the console. I'm going to see a bunch of errors along with stuff. Hey, so what I really got back is all of this text here. I got all this back across the pipeline, and this was an error, and this was an error, and then we got this when we write host. So effectively, if you actually wrote this to a file, all that you'd get back is this, right? So you wouldn't see these errors into the console, into the pipeline where they are, okay? And then here noting is that it created an error and it didn't stop. It got all the way to the end. So it's a non-terminating error. We threw 2 errors, right? But 2 errors got generated. okay, and it didn't stop, right? And then example 6, terminating errors will terminate the execution and they're not, even if they're not caught. All right, so if you throw an error, okay, non-term, it still goes to the output stream, okay, but not terminate the flow of the stream unless it's cat. So we're gonna, an example of this, I'm gonna put this into a file, right, and then we're gonna see what happens at this point. So this is really the exact same thing, right, but now we never got to the end, right? So we said, boom, script is done, halt, have a good day, goodbye, right? And so I'm just, it doesn't really matter what this is. Granted, it's, hey, I don't have access, and I actually forced it to stop, but boom, and now I stop. And so that's just a description as to what a terminating error is, how it looks when you're doing the code, okay, or what happens in the code. I was trying to think about other scenarios in which we can, see it in live, but then it just got too complicated, and we're going to go fundamentals at this point, right? So you kind of see at this point, I use this thing called, so we used before this get temp, and we did recursive, right? But we didn't tell it to do anything. And in this form, it was a non-terminating thing. So get child item will generate errors, but it won't stop the code. It won't say, hey, I can't do something and stop, because that's not really what its function is to do, right? But if we wanted to force it to stop when an error occurred, we can use this argument, okay, that is in all commandlets. It's in if you use advanced functions, you get a bunch of advanced parameters. You get verbose, you get debug, but you also get error action, and you'll get error variable, and that's what we'll talk about a little later too. So error action, let's talk about some of those error actions that you can enable on things that are out there. So anything that is a commandlet itself or an advanced function, if you add commandlet binding, it will add those components for you. All right, still no questions. All right, so
Phil,
yes.
the lion's share of stuff that happens in PowerShell is non-terminating errors, right?
Correct.
And so when we think about this, terminating errors are the minority, which means when you write your code, which I'm sure you're going to get to, is you have to tell it to stop if you want to. It's not going to stop. And that means also there'll be nothing in the catch, right?
So yes, in some fashion, depending upon what you want to do. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later with it will, as well, we're going to get to what's something called an automatic variable called an error variable, right? That holds all those errors. It'll just slowly accumulate all these errors as they come along, right? And so those errors are getting there, but they're not doing anything with them. So if you then wanted to actually stop execution and do some work, and then do some work beyond it, that's where you catch it. And you stop your command, get the error, do something with it, and keep going.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So that means the basic concept is like PowerShell thinks like, yeah, you might have an error in your script, but we don't want to interrupt finishing your script. So in most cases, we'll continue.
Correct.
Right. There are some cases where it's critical and you need to stop, but PowerShell defaults to, yeah, we're going to keep going.
Yes. So it's also based upon whoever wrote the commandlet or wrote the advanced function. They can generate terminating errors and say, boom, you're done. So they can do that, but that's on the author of the person writing the commandlet and the person writing the advanced function. So that person is making that choice for you. And so
you could do it on your own script too, right?
Huh?
You could do it on your own script.
And that's where I'm saying too, yeah. So you can, when you create your own functions, your own advanced functions or commandlets, you can say, hey, I'm going to throw an error, right? I'm going to write it out an error, but it's going to be terminating. And then I expect whoever it has to be, I would expect that to happen, right? And so this is part of where we're going to come along and say, hey, they were just saying, they were just sending up errors to me. Now I'm like, I want to hold on to things. I want to stop and I want to do some work. And so that's where we're at this point, right?
Phil, Phil, isn't this mostly controlled for the large part by the error action preference variable? In other words, the default error action preference is continue, which would show you the error but keep going. But if you had changed that overall, then to say stop, then anything that threw an error would stop.
Correct.
Unless somebody is explicitly doing the error action parameter on a given command.
Correct. So we'll get to that too, as far as you can set that, all along overall. But that's almost like this, hey, same thing. If you understand PowerShell well enough too, is like the same thing with the verbose preference. Do you want to see all the verbose content, even if you don't do it, or do it where you want? So this is where the default behavior is to continue along. And so we'll talk actually I think it's the next one, error action.
What do you want to ask now?
Yeah. Yeah, we
It's
talk
not
about
really, it's not really a big deal. I was really just curious. So you had the get child item, right? That
Yep.
That was the actual command that you were using.
Mhm.
And then you used the error action stop. So the one before this, right? The error was on like the second file and then like the seventh file, or for example,
Mhm.
the access denied was like almost at the end.
Yep.
So when you run the error action, is it going and you put stop, right, as the parameter value? Is it going to run, like, say if there's like 8, it runs through like 8 items? Then the 7th item is actually, yeah, see, that's what I'm asking.
Mhm.
So
Let's see what's going to happen. So we can just do a quick little, just so we're going to bring it out here, and just so we see what's in here. We can see what's in here, this folder. This is the folder we're talking about, right? I just basically did an explicit deny. So
Right.
my user is denied access to this folder, right? So this is what we do a DIR on. And I did recursive so that we'd see anything below, right? So this is where we are. Let me go back to this one, right? So we're going to stop at this point. So we'll see what we get, right? And so all that happened is because the command itself returned parts of it, right?
Right.
And it didn't get to the next one. So it stopped here, but this commandlet ran enough information that it returned all this and then threw the error.
Right. Okay, that's what my question was.
Right. If the commandlet or the process, let me think, is if you wrote a function, right, and you were running through like a for loop, right, and then you were throwing the errors and you'd stop. So first one, good. Second one, good. Second one, third one, and you got to the fourth one and it was an error, and you expressly said stop there,
Right.
it would go to 5.
Got you.
Right? But that would be in the code itself. And I think in my examples, one of them is where you put that try catch.
Right.
Where you put that, and you put it outside, inside, and then how deep do you want to go? And that's kind of the example where I was talking with like scoping. And so at this point, you're kind of limited to what the commandlets you're running. Okay, so here I'm limited to what getChildItem is doing. But I'm saying, hey, I want getChildItem. If it generates, to also throw to stop from there. I don't want to continue. Right. And then to that other point is the default ErrorActionPreference is continue. Right. And we'll talk about some of that in a second.
Yeah. So just one comment about the continue. PowerShell is designed, around the pipeline. So continue. It wants to continue processing things through the pipeline as much as it can. That's why the default is continue. So you need to override that if you need to handle those as they come along.
Hey Phil.
Yeah.
If,
Yes.
if you had continue in your catch block on this commandlet, so you have this in your try, right? And then you have your catch block that just said continue. Would it process the 8th file?
Well, I didn't put a catch in. We're not there yet. So yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right.
Yes. So if we'll get to what you can do with catches and then what happens. So to that point, you just continue, but you can also just do nothing, right? You can catch it and then just keep going and not do anything, because catching, all it means is that we'll get to that in a little bit. When you do a catch, really what's happening is PowerShell basically looks in the current scope. So when you create a try, okay, you have to match it with a catch or a finally, or you can have multiple catches and then a finally. So you have to have at least one of the two, a catch and a finally, and you can have multiple catches. You can only have one finally, right? And so we'll get to why there's multiple catches in that point. It's because you can catch different things. But the point is that once you caught something, you're just running the code inside the catch block. You can do nothing if you wanted to do. You can do stuff. You can not do anything. And then so that's some of the things that we'll kind of talk about. And so this is where that handling, what do you want to do with it? You had a question back there.
Well, I from what it sounded like, he was saying if there was a get child item and the error action was stop, and the catch was continue, would it go back to finish running the get child item? And it wouldn't, right?
Well, in this fashion, the get child item is done. To Sean's point, is it's done. It returned what it could. It returned as much as it can, plus threw an error, and then it's done. Have a good day, right? And so typically, what we then hear, what in PowerShell, there's this hidden thing called out default, and that's in the console and all that kind of stuff. But that's through a pipeline. It goes through the pipeline to the next person. And so if you do a stop, it stops. It doesn't go to the next item. It doesn't give you the next content.
Next
that's
command,
why,
next item.
So, So,
correct.
So the error action
Yeah,
parameter.
that's why we have no error.
Um,
Go ahead.
the error action parameter. So there's a little more refinement there. There are statement terminating errors, and there are script terminating errors, or that are fatal errors. So using error action stop is a statement terminating error condition. So get child item will stop, and so it won't continue enumerating more files after that. But the script it's in will continue if your catch block does nothing.
Yeah. Okay. So here we are basically writing an error without and throwing an exception and generating a terminating error. So we're just going to do that. Oh, that's not what I want. Oh, what the heck? Hold on. You tell me I can't use F8? Oh my god. Oh, there we go. So we can just see the concept down here. That's good. We can see the concept. Right. So we wrote an error, right? And then we kind of saw at this point, we're going to kind of look at what we caught. And so I caught that error, and then it threw back out. So it wrote another host. But at this point, it threw an error but didn't do anything, right? So here, we're going to do the same thing, but we're actually going to stop, like we just said. We're going to terminate the error. So we did all these wrote errors, but nothing still got to the end. So we can do the same thing again, and we're going to caught. So hey, we caught that error. We caught here, and actually just wrote a host, say I caught it, right? So it's at this point, it's not so much what we're doing, it's just that, hey, we're catching and not catching things, right? And so by simply adding stop to some random commandlet that accepts it and it can work, and I'm just using write error itself, right? And then somebody jump me to it, it's doing all this work, and we have to add this on because the default action is continue, right? And to the point before, what is continue? Continue will happen, right? So stop is what we typically want to do, right? There are some options that are available too, and you can set the error action preference automatically, or you can do it internally. So there is silently continue, right? So we don't even get, and if you use silently continue, you won't even get an error into the console, but it still automatically gets to the error variable, which we'll talk about later. That is something that happens automatically. You can't control at this point. It just starts collecting them, right? So I don't want to see any of the errors as they come, right? I don't want to see them into the console. I don't want to show them into the output stream. I just want to keep them into this error variable. That's all I want to do, okay? So continue, that's the default, okay? Write an error to the output error stream, and then keep on going. We have ignore, means don't do anything, right? Just, I don't care if errors are happening, nothing's gonna happen. There's even, inquire, means if you want to ask the user what to do, right? Hey, if an error happens, prompt them tells you, what do you want to do? You want to keep on going, or do you want to halt? Right? And then suspend, but that's only for workflows, but I just wanted to put it out there for clarity. So there is a suspend, but if you're using PowerShell workflows, which I don't think anybody's doing anymore, but it's out there. So we kind of saw before, we're going to set 8. We saw caught. We caught it, and we didn't continue any further. So here, this is going to almost be the exact same thing, but we're not going to catch anything, and we're not going to see anything either, right? So we didn't see anything. We didn't catch anything. But then the last thing I want to point out is what is in the error variable. I'm going to kind of cheat ahead of this. It's just here there's an error variable, but what we caught is the one before. What we see is the one before. Or so we see this one, but we didn't see anything in the output. So this is the example where we don't see what we saw before. So if we ignore, this is all the exact same thing over and over and over again, but we're just changing the functionality. So ignore, it threw an error, didn't catch it, nothing happened. Even though an error was generated, we just skipped over the whole thing. And so if there are cases where, hey, if something happens, I don't really care, just keep going, don't write it into anywhere. That's what ignore is going to do. And then what was really cool is I liked inquire. He's like, hey, it paused the script. I'm like, now we're here. Hey, what do you want to do? You want to keep on going? You want to keep on going for everything? Or do you even want to halt? I'm going to halt. Boom, I get nothing. And then we got his halt, right? So there's an option to kind of,
There's one more option now, and that's break.
That is in 7, and I was going to get to that one.
Okay.
It's only in 7. So 7, all right, I'm just going to skip on over it. So you can now in 7 use a break, which is if you're going through a loop and that kind of thing, it will just break at that point. So what's the real functionality beyond just like looping?
It's like a breakpoint in the debugger, so it breaks to the debugger. It's not like the break statement.
Oh, see, I didn't even know that. I assumed it was like just like the for loops and just break out of the current loop and just jump out. But if it's a checkpoint break.
Yeah, it's a checkpoint, and it
or breakpoint.
It stops there in the debugger.
Okay. All right. Cool. So now this is where we go on to the next thing. Is this? So now, hey, this is where I want to generate my own stop events. Okay, I want to do some things that I just want to throw. I want to the commandlet itself in my own logic in my code. I want to say boop error stop, right? Call it error. Actually, you're throwing an exception. So I say error, but error is just this ephemeral word. Okay, it can mean anything to anybody, right? Is it really a problem? I don't know. Only if you say it's a problem. So at this point is you throw an exception. So we're going to go down to, hey, we're going to get all the items, and then I'm just this generic stuff. We kind of saw what the folder structure looks like. So when it finds a file that's JSON, I'm going to say boop. Well, hold on, we don't want this file, right? I only want text files, right? So that if in extension, I want to throw saying, hey, I should only be those files, right? So here we go. Hey, I logged an error, right? And what is it? We're going to catch it. So we threw an error, right? And we caught it because we wrapped it in text. So we have this try, catch, and then here's where we are. One of the things that I also did in here too is we'll see eventually. Oh, so I think we did inside the catch block. There is, just like in everything else that inside of the loops, you can use the $_. You'll also see me a little later using $PS item. So the current item, which is going to be the current error rate itself, right? If you generate more than one, each time you go into the catch block, you're going to get the current error record. It can be of many types or the exception itself, and that is what that is. So you can then inspect it. We're going to see some of that in a little later. So you can inspect it and do some other work. And so I did this, and I kind of just left it in this point. But I wanted it, it exists within that block and then goes away. So scoping. So in here, I stuck it into a variable so I can then do some other work on it. So actually, let's do that. We go off script, but we're going to do that. All right. So now I have this thing var, and that's the error I just did. But now I can see what it is, what that event, that thing. So location info. We'll see some of this later. But hey, I can get some information about what it was, right? I can line number, and we'll see some of that later. So there is a way to do that as well. Oh, yeah, we're going to see that here.
Is the try just what do you call it, Boolean, you say? Is it just, so the try is as long as that statement is true?
No. So so try here is just it's a structure of code that says, hey, from here to here, I'm going to enter into a place where I'm going to monitor this code. Call it that. So we're going to monitor code inside of here, right? And then that's it. And so if any errors are generated in that any errors or exceptions are generated here,
Right.
I'm then going to, do some other work. All right. I'm now going to, there's a matching catch. All right. So if this catch, if anything happens here and I need to use the catch, I'm going to go into this catch. I'm going to now change my flow and go to the catch. Okay. But then I will also potentially come back into,
So
if I need to, but I won't ever come back. I won't come back. Yeah.
So think of it as scope. What's really happening under the covers is there's a whole exception handling tree where all the exceptions are defined and they're essentially their catch blocks are defined. So anything inside of a try is a new scope, and it adds it to the tree. And if the exception isn't handled in the catch, then the exception gets sent up to the next higher scope to see if it gets handled there. And so try is just establishing a new scope of to watch for exceptions.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So here, this is kind of that example here at this point. Hey, so there's a try way out here for the whole get child items kind of thing. And then say, hey, I want to, just for this block, I want to try and do some work here. But if this guy doesn't catch him, if the other thing is, I can't think of anything at this point. So hold on, we're going to.
I mean, so the part that is like kind of confusing me is that in your try, there isn't an error when you run that, right? In that block of code, you have get child item, and you said if it's equal to a JSON file, right? Like that would pull a JSON file. So where is the error?
So the error is here. I throw an error.
Got you.
I'm just using code to throw an error.
Got you.
Right.
Okay, so
I'm doing
throw is the error, right? Like that's what's creating the error.
Yeah. So let's actually get away from the word error. I'm going to throw an exception. That's the actual proper term, is to throw an exception.
So I was going to chime in earlier, and so Phil is doing a commendable job of trying to wrangle a bunch of topics that really belong together in a short amount of time. And so all of these topics are new to you, meaning continue, break, try catch, finally, error action preference. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And so you definitely want to go to some structured learning, because most of the learning will have you work on one concept before you get to the other, rather than doing them together. So now, to your point, in this try, that's an if statement. So the one thing you have to remember on an if statement is an if statement executes when the condition is true. So what that's saying is when the condition is true, meaning if there's a file extension that says JSON, do what's in the if. And in this case, the if says throw, okay? And so that's the try. The catch is the part that's going to pick up what was thrown and do something with it depending on what you say. And so that's what I said. A lot of this all at once, Phil's doing a really great job. It's just hard to figure it all out.
I think some of it is you haven't really talked about throw yet, and you're throwing it in.
I'm going to try to talk about what you throw. I thought
just do try get process notepad or get process code.exe, and it'll run, and then do code2.exe and it'll fail. And because that get process command failed on its own, and even there, if he has error action, if he doesn't specify error action stop, the catch doesn't invoke anything. Only once he creates the terminating error does the try block move it into the catch. If I do another thing, whatever you tell it to.
Yeah, that's and yeah, I guess we could have done it here. It's just like
and the other part that I find frustrating with all this when you're trying to learn this is there's a best practice. And so when we talk about code, we have the PowerShell, we have a representative from PowerShell team on there, right? PowerShell team is going to write stuff. But remember, when you pull in modules, modules are written by teams possibly other than the PowerShell team. And those teams, they could be other Microsoft teams, they could be other vendors, they could be us.
Right.
You're supposed to follow some best practices, but you don't have to. And so the output that you see in a particular module may not follow what he's showing here, because that person who wrote the module didn't follow what most people would expect to happen. And so if you're trying to think how this all works with all the different things, you probably should throw away all the other stuff and just think about the core PowerShell language. And then layer on all the other tools that you use. Because there's too many variables, right? There's preferences, there's code you can put in a script, there's a modular preference, there's scope, what happens when this happens. And when you're trying to reason that all out in your head, it gets really confusing. So boil it down to the basics. And I think that's why Phil is sticking with get child item. And these are core commandlets.
Yeah.
And so we all know what's supposed to happen with those.
Yeah. And so my hope is that point. Is so here we're going to run this. And this is where my example of multiple tries, right? And so, hey, at this point, if an error happened out here, right, in this code or way down here, down here, okay, it would get caught by this guy, right? And that's why this error is different. It talks about different things, right? But because I then created another try, so then anything inside of here, here's a new scope. So we started the first one, and then we went into again. And so if an error happens inside of here, it gets processed by this guy's matching catch. Well, that's this guy, right? And if this guy doesn't catch it, it goes up to this guy's matching catch, which is this one. And that's where that whole goes up the tree, and that's as the example there, right? And so we're just going to run this whole thing really quickly, too far, right? And so we got this, hey, this is what we threw. So we caught it here. And I said, hey, we did some other funky stuff we'll get to a little later, but it was on line 6 of what I copied, right? And so what I was going to do for paste, yeah. So we're going to see what blows some people's minds.
Talk about best practice. I never do this.
Yeah, you don't do this.
I never.
So my point is that it got caught by the for each objects, right?
Get it.
This is where the try was back there. So I'm modifying the code slightly. I'm just throwing in some other object type, some other exception type that says, hey, this is a VMware object exception. And so if I run this whole code again, it's going to get caught by this guy because the first catch didn't catch anything of that type. Right? So now getChildItem did it because he's doing some try, and he goes, I will only catch these types. Right? So that's what we'll see later too. Right? We will only catch these types, and that's not, I just threw the generic text files. Oh, that's not what that, I'm like, okay, give it to the next guy. And he caught, well, I'm going to catch everything. There's nothing there, I'm going to catch anything. I don't care what it is, I'm going to catch it. Right? And so that's why it got caught here versus here. So you can, my next little thing is the different catch types. Can't remember where we're going here. Oh, and then you can do other things with the items there, point. Similar kind of thing, but we're just going to skip over at this point. I think I want to get to this point. And so here's a good example of multiple catch types, right? And so I've actually used this in some code before, and you can, hopefully it's clear enough, is that if you use, I can't do this in live, but if you do, actually it looks like it's trying to do some stuff. But if you get a VM, you have to actually connect to the vCenter itself, right? And if you're not connected to the vCenter, you get an error. Hey, you got to connect to the vCenter first before you can get a VM itself. Well, it will give you a server connection exception. That's what comes back, right? And so if that's what comes back, well, this is actually some other message. I'm just writing some messages to say what's happening. You can actually put here, like call a, connect VI server and do some work, or just report, hey, stupid, connect to a vCenter server. Then call the server, okay? But I'm actually stopping so I can do it. But if I run the exact same code and you happen to be connected to the vCenter and you can't talk to the VM, so this VM doesn't exist. Well, what you'll get back is a VIM exception, which is the virtual infrastructure management exception. Just that I can't talk to the object. And if you don't get any of those, you could potentially just get the generic catch. So at this point, I'm using some generic code to catch just the types I'm looking for. Some of the other things, like I think AD returns a couple object types, but again, it's all based upon what the commandlets you're running, what this code inside of here happens to be ejecting.
Invoke web requests. has
Invoke
different-
requests will do some other
different
funky
catch
stuff.
Types, yeah.
Yeah, we'll give you different responses based upon what you're getting. All right, so you can do that as well. That's a good example. I didn't think of it that, but this is what I use more often.
Yeah.
I use VMware. Right. So in that same fashion, so we kind of talked about var before. Then in 7.2. So this actually, one of the points is like, well, how do I get what this is? I don't know what object I'm returning back. And so you kind of saw in before in some of the other code I had is inside the catch, I set it equal to a variable so that I know I can use it. And so we talked about error. Actually, we didn't. I must have changed my ordering, but I thought I talked about error, but we'll talk about it later. So whatever the last error is, right? And then you can use the exception and it has a type and the full name, and then that's how you can figure out what its full type is. I don't know why this one happened to be one of the. Oh, you know what? I think it's just one of the examples I was using, but this should always work effectively, or maybe just where I am at this point. But the error itself, you can get its type and just use that entire type. It is also, this is kind of in the weeds. I'm not sure we want to even go down it, but you could even do this and it will catch everything in underneath, right? And so it is that tree. How high do you want to go into that tree? So you could do like, you could even do, let's do the other way. So you can catch here at this point. I think you can even do system, right? And that would just catch everything, right? This would catch everything from the system. It would miss all the VMware stuff, but hey, if the system generated an error, then in PowerShell core is all based upon .NET and all that. It's all part of system, and so that would catch everything. But that's how you'd correct, and you can go to system data.
As an example, Phil, so just to go off the get child item one, so the try catch catch catch. So when you try to loop through a get child item, let's say one of them is one error you see it's not JSON. The other error is you can't even read it. The other error is so there's different types of errors you can catch within a function, and that's what he's showing here.
Yeah.
I think the get child item one might be easier to explain because there's I'm just thinking out loud.
It'd be interesting.
You can't read it. You can't. I don't know. What are errors?
That would be an interesting thing as far as like not found. I don't know what.
Not found.
You have to just do some exploration as to access denied.
Yeah.
So I got an access denied. You could it's like other things and what other types you could generate.
Yeah.
Like a timeout. I don't know if timeout would give you like you tried to get just a share that didn't exist and you got a unavailable. That might be a something.
Or the file name's too long because you're on Windows.
Yeah.
So back to where we were before. I guess I know I did it twice. Basic try catch. Now I'm jumping all over the place because I had a bunch of notes and I started doing stuff. Oh, this is where I came in and talked about. So just that basic try catch, kind of ran over it before. So we kind of get at this point, hey, we're doing some stuff, getting some services, then we do a stop. Hey, we never got to this line. We never got to that line. We caught. And then I outputted the error itself. And so at this point, what we did is we just wrote to the console saying, hey, we caught. And then I took the item and we threw it back out. We returned it to the pipeline, right? So we sent it back out. And so that's almost like a non-terminating error. We took it, we caught it, and we kept it going. We sent it back up again, right? And so then we got to end. So here we caught it, and we still got to end. So this is kind of like stupid, but it's not stupid, but it's the non-terminating error, or it's a terminating non-terminating error, right? So we took the terminating error, and then we just sent it right back in the catch, and we gave it back out. Right? So we sent it out.
To be clear, though, you are just outputting the error record there. You're not rethrowing the error.
Well, that's true. Yeah. So thank you for correcting. Yes. Yes. You can't. There's a way to throw it again, can't you?
Well, you could just do a throw PS item.
Yeah, you could just throw. I think there's another way to throw a terminating error or something like that.
If you wrapped all that in a variable and you put throw PS item, that wouldn't come back to the pipeline, would it?
I think his point is throw here.
Yeah, if you do throw there, you wrap all this try catch
And another
or
one.
equals try catch,
Yeah.
that wouldn't end up in the pipeline, would it? That's a different stream, isn't it?
If I wrap the whole thing again in another try, and then I didn't do
But
anything.
like, in your if from line 28 through line 37,
I think what you're asking is what's executed in the catch block in the standard data stream, or is it in the error?
in the error stream, yeah.
Anything that you output in the catch block goes to the pipeline unless you're explicitly writing to the error stream.
And throwing,
So then you would
Just
end
be
up
us
with
out of-
2 items.
So throwing doesn't send it to the pipeline. Throwing
Right.
sends it to the higher level exception handler.
Yeah, so we don't get anything here because I threw it again, but then I didn't do anything with anything. Right? So I didn't get anything back out.
yeah, that's why it's important to catch your errors and throw them into a variable or the error variable, or throwing them explicitly and
Yeah.
not return them to the pipeline, because I've done that plenty of times. So I've done a for each loop and a try catch, and I hit an error and it returns to the pipeline, and I'm like, my object's clean, and boom, there's an error in my object output. I'm like, oh crap, I didn't handle it correctly. So,
Correct. Yeah. So I'm gonna come back out. All right. So a simple try catch with exception and do nothing. That's kind of what we just did at this point. Hey, this is a generic, hey, this is gonna throw an error. And what's the error? It's just, hey, the system itself, PowerShell, is gonna say, I don't know what that commandlet is. But that's still an error, right? And so that is a valid error. And it will just do nothing. No, it didn't do anything because, hey, I just wrapped the whole thing. I did a fat finger, and because I didn't do anything with it, it didn't do anything. And then here we are looking inside. Oh, this is where we go, the current exception. Checking some more stuff inside what the current exception is. So we're going to do this, try catch. This is a good example. I stole this code from somebody's doc. So I think it's Kevin Marquette's. So when you have the exception itself, we're going to do that itself. Okay, it looks like this object weird, it's this formatted error output, right? But if you are using it in any other form, okay, it typically gets run into a get stream. So if you say, write host, you saw me before, you can do it this point. Right, I just get the words. I didn't get this big thing that I got before. That's because it's actually using write host and then using PowerShell to say, give me the string value of that, which is just calling get string. But what I also want to say is that, hey, it is an object over itself. It is an error record at this point, and it has its own property sets. Okay, it has categories, here's the exception itself. So the error itself, and then you get the exception. That's kind of what we talked about before. That's kind of like the details. But then there's some metadata that's available to you, which is like invocation info. We kind of showed some of that before. So let's look at some of that. We can format the list. Actually, let's look at invocation error.
So do you ever in your code put like exit 1, exit 2, exit 5? Do you ever do an exit with specific exit code in your code when doing try catches or anything like that, or no? I don't see it a lot, but I've seen it in some code.
I've only done it when I'm wrapping it when I'm putting some of my code inside of a packaging tool, because I need it to exit back out.
Gotcha.
But you're doing that because you need the PowerShell exe to return that code.
Back
So you're
to
using,
whatever's exit.
yes.
Yeah.
And so that is throwing all the way outside of PowerShell exe, right? And so you're going all the way out. You're losing all, you're throwing everything inside of PowerShell and all the metadata you have at that point, right? So that's kind of like full stop, exit 1, exit 3100, 3101, whatever.
Yeah.
So here we are back with invocation info. You'll see a lot of people use invocation info, and the reason they do it is because you get other parts with it. If you wanted to create your own logging, hey, this error occurred where? Well, that's where all this other stuff. You can that formatted block of text. One of the things you got back was, well, where was that error code put in? Okay, this was called, it was on line 2, character 5, it started there, right? Counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's where it went from there. But you can get those different parts. So here's the line number, here's this. I only point that out because sometimes, hey, if inside your catch block, you want to then, hey, I want to write to a file, I want to write to the event log and stuff like that. And then you want to put the different parts. You don't have to actually use this, hey, I want to parse this text. Some people are like, hey, we're going to start parsing this text into give me all the parts. Like, I don't want to do all that. Knowing that there's some metadata underneath the hood,
Objects,
it has,
PowerShell objects.
yeah, it's all objects. And so there is that metadata in the invocation. This was generated here, and when this this exception was created, here's all the where it was created from. But then the exception itself, the actual raw exception, is deep inside there too. So you can get that exception itself. So I call it current exception, but the exception itself is here underneath. So that is there, but then let's do another get member shorthand there, right? And so now here is the actual invocation there itself. So you have its help link, the error record itself, the toString, that's where that comes from, the source, the message. So we saw that message. Well, that's where the pieces are. So let's look for. So I'm just jumping all over the place. And then we saw toString. We saw that, right? But we're going to do the same thing again. Current exception. We're going to say exception. I'm going to say message. And we'll see that they're both identical because that's what comes out. All right. So when you say toString, it's just actually going inside the exception and getting the message, right? And so one of the other things here, let's do this one. Current exception, select star, and then we're going to format the list. Shorthand, yes. But we're not, when you're using code, always use the long form. But if you're just writing code free form, shorthand's always okay. So this is what's inside of there. Here's the actual error record itself. Here's that message we were just looking at. Okay, there's some data inside of there. There's a datagram. Then the inner exception, because it can have exceptions underneath itself. That's kind of where you could throw an internal exception. There's other parts. And so that's actually what's happening at this point. And then there is a stack trace. I don't really use it, but if you were using a commandlets and stuff like that, there may be information inside the commandlet that gives you more information. Hey, you see sometimes you see the bug log and here's the whole stack trace of .NET. Well, that will be there, but you got to go inside there and go get it, right? So we're good there. I think I'm done with my try catch. Again, I'm not really going over in detail why we use some of these. It's just here's all the things that are available to you, and hopefully, if you're not familiar with some of this stuff, you can at least, hey, I know there's something there. At the end, we're going to get to resources that get, hey, I can now go. This is where I need to go, right? I know enough about. There's something they talked about this. That's really why I'm kind of glossing over a bunch of stuff, but also I want to kind of cover a bunch of stuff. So try catch finally. Try catch finally, we kind of talked about before, is try has to match with the catch, but it doesn't always match with the catch, but it has to match with either catch or finally, right? You can have try catch finally, so you can catch any errors, but finally is a kind of a funky thing. So you start this try, we're doing this monitoring of a block of code, right? And then whatever happens inside there, if there's an error, we jump into catch. But if you have a try, now I can say, hey, I want to try this, but then no matter what, okay, I always want to do this finally at the end, right? And so that's what we're going to kind of get to at this point right here. So we're going to do this thing where, hey, we're going to get some data. Actually, I'm going to parse the data live, right? I'm actually going to do it in PowerShell itself because it's just easier there, right? What the heck? I don't think I can do it here. So it's getting data. It's waiting for me. Why do I not see it? It's up there. Come on, where's my? Stop. That's not what I want. Stop.
It's working in your console session now.
Yeah. So the point being, okay, so what we're doing is we said, go get me some input, right? But at this point, if I say data, hey, I did this data and I ran it and I cleaned up. I don't know what's up with my console. So I'll run this again. Hey, go get some data. And it returns, got my data, and I cleaned up, right? And I ran this other code. But to that same point, we're going to do this whole thing again. And I'm going to say, I don't want to give you any data. I'm going to hit Control C, exit out, boop, but it still runs finally, right? And so if you have some code, if you're doing with some work and you want to try some work, you want to do some work, but you got to make sure that something happens. And 90% of the time, I've always seen it's been cleanup work, right?
Is that the right spot for like disconnect commands?
That's exactly what we're going to get to. So cancel.
So like if you connect to Exchange to
It's here.
parse some information about group, just finish a script with a script error that you want to close your connection. Right. Maybe you don't want to.
Yeah. I had some code. Oh, you know what's here? It's here. That's where it is. This is actually live code from some other code I have, but we use this to basically do some SQL work, right? And so one of the things it does is once you enter this function, it connects to SQL, and it's basically adding the local system account to the sysadmin on that particular server, right? And so if any errors happen, well, fine, it comes down here and it writes an error. That's fine. But at all times, it always closes that connection at the end, right? I always want to make sure that that connection to SQL has been closed, right? So there's a good example as to why, I don't know why somebody put in here basically clearing the error variable because it wipes everything in the error, but it's kind of crazy. But the whole point is that, hey, we want to come in here, we want to do some work on SQL. But one of the things we don't want is we absolutely want to make sure that we close that connection at the end, right? If you're doing some other work, you want to do, hey, make a connection over here, do some work, but then make sure you close. Well, that's also, it's roughly cleanup work. That's what you're using it for, right? How are we doing with time? Oh, getting close to time. So looks like we will going to run out of time. I'm going to want to run it out of time. So kind of this example here, we kind of talked about error action. We talked about this thing we get with free when we do commandlets or we're doing advanced parameters. There is something called an error variable. You can actually, add to a commandlet you're running and say error variable, so that if any errors happen, it still goes to the error log. It still goes to the out to the error stream, but it also throws it into a variable that I can then hold onto as a separate thing. And so this is my example at this point. It says, hey, I'm going to basically, I have two paths. One of them exists, one of them doesn't exist, and I want to basically create one. And then, but if anything errors out, well, I want to hold on to that error, right, in a separate variable that I can do work with. I think I'm dying here. I don't know why this is not working. I think my code, is this guy still trying to churn along? Close. What's he doing? He's been running for 4 minutes. Don't stop. All right, we're gonna wrap this up. So I can't run this code. We're gonna run it outside of here then. So, but at this point, we now missing folders. We'll get through. We're gonna get through. I think we understand at this point. There is a variable now that is the missing folders, right? So I couldn't write to this folder, and that's going to come into this folder, but it's not going to be the current error, right? It'll hold on to what I mean with the current error is because I generated other errors down below. So these will just hold on to those variables and those errors, into a variable. I think I did sort this wrong. Is that error itself is a global error, a global variable, global variable that is an array itself. And I'm not going to be able to do this. Dang it. I got to close the whole thing. I'm not going to be able to show this. Die. Oh, dang it. Sorry. Save all. Why is it not here? Sorry, everybody.
Every message comes up. Like, who's messaging? Because it's the meeting.
All right, back to here. Talked about, oh, this could be fun. Hey, the error variable doesn't include anything because we just started brand new. Oh, what happened?
You should see it in your console there. Just do $error there.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Sean. So $error. Now you see that I had this huge thing of all this work that I had to do. But at this point, $error here has 10 items in it. So all the things inside the session itself that I've done, I just generated the errors before. Right? And it is a zero type. It's just an array list, right? And so you work with it just like that, just as you normally would, right? So it's nothing special. It's nothing crazy, funky, weird, but it's just a continuously growing variable that holds on to all the errors themselves, right?
And 0 is always the newest.
Yes, correct. Yeah, so it's a zero index and array.
Well, all arrays are 0 index, but usually things are added to the end, not the beginning.
Oh, good point. I've always left that way. So that's where we get to error. What else? Did I want to do anything crazy inside of it? We already talked about the invocation info. We talked about other things. We talked about all that. There is a thing called trap, okay, which is kind of like a catch, but so when you outside of this whole try catch thing, right? You can define this block called trap, and so if any errors are generated, it will then be caught by a trap. But there is nothing special about what it is, but there is this functionality called trap. I've never seen it. I don't know if anybody have any good use cases for why you do trap.
So traps, when you define them in your script, are always hoisted to the global scope of the top level of the script. Unlike your try-catch blocks are scoped with where they're defined. So if you have an unhandled exception that gets past all of your try-catch blocks, it then goes to the trap.
Okay. But you'd have to put it, and can you have a trap? Is it always the global? So you could have multiple traps down below?
You could have multiple traps because you can type them.
Okay.
But and it doesn't matter where in your script file you define them. They are always global, even if you define them within a function.
So I can define it down here. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because
so here in this example, hey, we're getting some bad stuff, right? Hey, we're doing some other stuff, and then every single time we're going to say, hey, we're a trap. So we should expect 2 traps at this point, and that's the example at this point we're going to see. So we see we trapped twice. Hey, we try to divide it by 0. We entered the trap. Back here, we entered the trap, and then we completed it at the very end. So there's a thing where you can say break, means that, hey, I'm done here, right? You can also continue and continue on. So trap is kind of a unique thing. I don't know how many people have used it in that fashion. Or actually, this is continued means continue on. Break means stop, kind of like a terminating error, jump out, right? So if we do this one with this trap example with a break, once we get to this one, it won't get to this one. And so we'll see that in a second. We'll see that right now. Okay, I only got to the first trap and then it stopped, right? It broke, or it hit, called a break. So we didn't continue on into the code, right? We didn't continue on. You couldn't put a continue inside of your trap. Means, all right, we're good to go. Keep on going, right?
since we're talking about scope here, I do want to mention the error action preference variable is scoped. So it's a default variable in PowerShell, so it's global. But inside your script, that is inherited from the global scope. So it'll be whatever the value is inside your script. But if inside your script you change it to another value, when you exit the script, you're back in the global scope with the global value.
Okay.
So,
I got it.
And same within a function. If you have a script with multiple functions, you can set the error action preference within a function, and it only applies inside that function. When the function exits, it goes back to whatever the higher scope has.
I guess that makes sense because I've known to do that with the verbose preference, and I guess that's the same thing.
Yep.
All right. So talked about error variables, other samples. Yep. And then, so that is pretty much the gist of it. I know that was a lot of content. I know some of that was, I didn't really want to go too deep and go other examples because I thought it would just too far down to the weeds. I wanted to try not to go too deep, but just give you the gambit of what is available to you at this point. So you can catch things, you can catch things that are thrown to you. If an error happens, know that most likely you need to expressly say that I want to catch this. Okay, you need to invoke a stop. You need to invoke something else so that you can catch it. Okay, but if you don't catch it, know that you can get it other places in the error variable itself. Okay, you can get things there. You can get it from the console, but 90% of the time, what you'll want to do is actually hit a stop or error variable. So then now there's a variable that's going to catch any of those variables. Not going to catch them, but it's going to put there so that you can inspect them later. Okay, so you can do some of that work. And so that's really the core functionality of when dealing with PowerShell and error handling, is that understanding these things that you can do with errors, not really what to do with them, but then here's your tools so that you can then go and do whatever happens to be what you need to do for that program. So Microsoft Docs has great content. Okay, there's the about pages. Yeah, Windows error records, kind of deep into error records themselves. Know that you can actually just do, even help about row. I can spell, right? So help is there for you. So the help is there. Try, catch, finally, throw, trap, scopes. So this is really good for scoping. We kind of talked to some of that. It's not really error-ish, but it is good to understand what that is. Okay, error records themselves, and then this is also a good one to. This is an article that was by Kevin Marquette, that Microsoft Docs imported from there, and he did some really great job, and they basically reproduce some of that. So some of this content you kind of see will be reproduced there. And then Sean gave me this other content that I did not know about, and so he talked about some experimental features. This is pretty much deep in the weeds as far as some of the new things that are coming. So Sean, you want to quickly on video talk about what these new things were? So the native command error preference, you can read it here at this point, but do you want to give a synopsis, Sean?
Yeah, so it's it controls whether or not you want to. So native commands don't always set the last exit code, or they set it to a value. They set it to a value of 0 for success or non-zero for failure. And so this experimental feature determines whether or not you want to treat a non-zero response as an error, because there's a lot of tools that use non-zero responses for success results. Like maybe they return a count of items returned or something like that as the exit code. That's not an error. that's a count of things. So you want to ignore that as an error. So
Oh.
that's what this does. And then there was an experimental feature that went mainstream in 7.2, and that's this does not apply error action to standard error. So go to that one. So what this does is there's a I want to say there's a new way. Oh, so for native executables, a lot of executables write to standard error instead of standard out for all kinds of things, not just errors. So maybe they have a banner that displays when you run the command. That's usually written to standard error, or they have Git does that. So there's this all this kind of junk output that goes to standard error, and we no longer treat that as errors that end up in the error stream.
If you do git club, I think it redirects to the std error stream with the specific code. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, any other questions? Oh, one of the things I wanted, I had it in some other notes, but it looks like I got dropped off. Is that there is a $_ but there is a $? That is just a Boolean. It will return whatever happened before. Was it an error? That's all it's going to say. I don't think I've ever seen anybody use it because it's really tough. Because if you did it twice, the first one's going to return false because, hey, that was an error. But then if you run it again, it's going to return true because, hey, you successfully returned the fact that there was an error. So, hey, no, we're good. Then you lose it. So you can only run it once. So it's kind of this funky thing that I've never seen anybody use, but it's out there. And I saw it in the docs. So it's there. Return the last, what did the last thing return an error? It's just a Boolean, true or false, did it return? So I don't know if it helps much, but it's going to be too.
Yeah, it's not very reliable, and that's why this feature was done, is because all of that noise going to standard error would set $hook to false or to true.
$hook.
Yeah,
I didn't know. I've never heard that. $hook.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a $hook. All right. So for the resources, again, Microsoft Docs, top notch as far as understanding this better, what PowerShell can do, and other examples, and even in these if you're in Docs themselves at the bottom is also, hey, here it is. Hey, talking about break. I didn't put it in here. Continue, and all these. The relationships are really good. So props to the Docs team, and go from there. So thanks everybody. I'm not sure any questions. Nothing. You're quiet.
No, great.
All right. Thank you.